Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about learning through failure. Fun! Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on Bar Exam Toolbox, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back. If you've listened to this podcast over the last few years, it shouldn't be shocking to you that Alison and I like to read about education research and how we learn in our free time. We're so dorky. And we're also fascinated by how we deal with failure, which is evidenced by one of our first episodes of the Law School Toolbox podcast being on the book Mindset by Carol Dweck. So if you haven't read that book or listened to that podcast episode, we highly recommend it.
Definitely worth checking out.
So shockingly enough, we actually learn the most about learning when we read about the research about how children learn. Because as adults, we can really learn a lot from what is being done in the classroom to better learn about learning and retention. And a lot of these studies are done around math. I guess it's probably because it's easy to measure performance.
Well, and also I think because people have a lot of fear around math and learning math. And people, I think, of all the subjects in school, I think math is probably one of those where people do have the most sort of fixed mindset of like, I'm just bad at math.
Right. So recently, I read an article and then I sent it to Alison and then we sent it to the team and it was all circulated by my son's preschool teacher. So thank you to her. But it was about learning and it was focusing on how mistakes can actually lead to better learning. And we're going to link to this. It's an NPR article in the show notes, but I wanted to cover the gist of it here.
Yeah, because it was really interesting. I thought it was about how you retain information, particularly after you've made a specific mistake.
Yeah. So picture yourself studying for the bar exam. You're doing a challenging MBE question. It's on evidence, and you are sure that you got this one right. You just studied 405B. You're really like right there. 404B. Now see, I'm even getting my thing wrong. So it's you are really sure about the rule, and you've identified the trick in the fact pattern. You are golden, and then you look at the answer, and you are completely wrong.
Oh,
ouch. So you might at this point start to feel demoralized or that you really shouldn't be studying for the bar and that maybe you should just go have a cocktail and just let it all go. And that's kind of can be a normal response. But it turns out that although you might feel super frustrated when you've given something your all and you want to run and shut the book and run away from the experience, that this moment turns out is actually a moment for great learning. Because the research covered in this article says that the mistakes that we make with high confidence that are then corrected is one of the most powerful ways to absorb something and retain it.
And I think that's so powerful because there is always that feeling of when you're so sure that you're right about something and then you're not. I think there's like a shame component for a lot of people. Like you're embarrassed and you may even feel like your face is flushing. Like, oh my gosh, like how could I possibly have thought that was right and gotten it so wrong? But this is actually one of the moments where you can really get your brain to focus on why is this incorrect, what mistake did you make, and then not make that mistake again.
Right. Because we're all generally afraid of failure. And we're just going to do...
As a culture, we're not people who, sort of embrace failure.
No. And we're going to do what we can to avoid it at all costs, really. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why people do not really push themselves out of their comfort zone to test themselves while they're studying for the bar. Because if they get the wrong answer, they feel like a failure and then they want to give up.
Well, and the reality is, even if you look at the MBE, I mean, a good MBE score is going to be like maybe 70%.
Yeah, 75, you're really rocking it.
Yeah, I mean, if you get to 80% on the MBE, like you're probably one of the best people taking the test. And that's hard because, we're all people who are used to getting like 95, 100%.
Right. Yeah. And I think it is hard to own the fact that as we learn, we kind of need to create opportunities for these little failures so we can challenge ourselves and engage the parts of the brain that are going to learn from these mistakes. And, many of us are perfectionists, we're type A, but I think we can learn a lot by looking at kids. So I've learned a lot about failure by watching my children try and learn any new skill and see how comfortable they are with falling
Right.
or not being able to do something. Or, I recently went to a children's piano recital, and it was really interesting to watch the kids practice, to watch the kids make mistakes. And I thought what was amazing is when the children made mistakes, most of them just kept on playing.
Oh,
like
yeah.
it was just like a tiny speed bump. They didn't get frustrated. They didn't get upset. There were no tears. It was just like they kept going. And it was interesting at the end of the recital, the teacher at one point had played along with one of the students. And one of the things she said that she was so proud of everyone about how hard they had practiced and how the kids had made mistakes and rolled through it. And then she called out a mistake she had made, I think playing something from memory. And she said, I made a mistake in the song that I was playing, and it was fine. And I think that was a really sweet lesson to give all these small children, as young as 4 and 5 up to, young teenagers, about failure, is that we all are going to hit these bumps in the road, and it's what we do with it.
Well, and frankly, probably no one except her really even noticed. Maybe
I didn't notice.
Probably the person she was playing with knew, but
Right.
no one else knew.
Nobody else knew. Yeah. And so what's interesting is the research continues to show that you don't learn by just making wild guesses. And I think this is something that can happen, speaking of different parts of the bar exam with the MBE.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing MBE practice and you're just like, I'll just pick C.
I don't really know. I'm not I've got 2 minutes on this question. I'll
Mm-hmm.
skim it. Not really. The answer is not jumping out at me. I'll just, C looks good.
Yeah.
Moving on.
You're not going to learn anything from
Well, then
that.
maybe C was right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really engage your brain's attention.
No. And so you've got to, when you're doing practice, you kind of have to be giving it your all. You have to struggle to come up with the best, right answer that you can. Because then if you're wrong, you're more likely to remember why you were wrong, because you have your brain's full attention. And this is called memory reconsolidation, because you're summoning up prior knowledge, things that you learned in your brain when you're trying to answer a question, and you're correcting it.
Yeah, and I think this is so key. I think the MBE is a great place for this. I mean, one thing we have our students do that you can do on your own is for every single question they take, we ask them to make a grid of how confident are you about this answer. And, that takes, 5 seconds, basically, after you've selected B. You're like, oh, I'm 50% confident. I'm 100% confident. I'm 0% confident.
Right.
Because what that does, it basically shows you where were you totally guessing, meaning that you definitely need to go back and review this, even if you got it right. And it also shows you where is that point where you thought you knew what you were doing and you thought you were correct and you're not correct.
Yeah.
That is where the alarm bells should be going off of oh, this is a really great opportunity for me to figure out where I went wrong and not do that again.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't want to ask themselves that question.
Right. No,
I think they don't want to know.
uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. And I think even acknowledging whether or not you're confident is uncomfortable.
Yeah. Sometimes people don't even know. It's just not something you've thought about. But you need to think about it because, ideally when you go into the test on actual test day, you want to feel pretty confident about most of your answers.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are going to be some where you're like, wow, I did not ever see this rule.
Right.
When I got that, when I had that happen, I just tried to tell myself, probably those are the sample questions. They're just testing.
Yeah. Those are the real questions.
Yeah. If it's so crazy that I've what in the world is this even about? That's a test question. Don't need to worry too much about it. I'll answer it to the best of my ability, but I'm not going to stress over it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that, we kind of seem to ebb and flow where it comes about how to learn things. And I feel like, we are in this camp now around looking at education as a whole, where we're standardized testing really doesn't work. You can just learn for the test. It doesn't really work. And so I feel like we've moved away from this idea that you want to be quizzed, you want to test your knowledge. And I think that these are skills about retention that you can look at in a different way. This is different than just kind of these blanket testings. We could also talk about whether or not the bar exam should be the gatekeeper,
right.
But it is.
It is. Yes, you have to pass.
So you have to pass.
Well, I think it's also the difference between, kind of if you're thinking about the bar exam or a classroom test, there's a difference between the end of grade test.
Yeah.
Where it's you've studied all year, you've done your thing, and then suddenly you have 2 days of testing that's supposed to tell you something. that's different than what they're, figuring out now, which is that ongoing, like well-designed quizzes and things like that can actually help you understand and retain information, but you need to be doing them on a weekly, bi-weekly, even sometimes daily basis.
Mm-hmm. And the research in this article raised this with math students at a school in New York City. They've been giving more quizzes, but they had followed up those quizzes by a review of students' specific errors. And then the initial results showed that that review of those errors was actually helping performance. So by forcing students to quiz themselves and kind of be one with their wrong answers and learn from them, that they were in the end doing so much better. And I think that, we have really tried to implement more quizzing in our tutoring programs. Mm-hmm. I don't think everybody likes it, but or even does it sometimes. But, we're trying to really show students, like, you have to have these honest moments with yourself and practice recalling this information to be able to see if you can do it and to see if you can get it right. And if you're not going through that process, you're not really learning. And I think the neuroscience behind this, as we learn more about it, is interesting, that there are different parts of our brain that are controlling the memorization of information in this way.
Yeah, I think, people often for the bar, they think, I just have to spend, say I have 10 weeks, I'll spend 8 of those weeks learning the material. Mm-hmm. Then I'll spend a week or two memorizing the material, and then I'll be good to go. Right. And it's like,
maybe not.
That is probably not our recommended technique.
Mm-hmm.
You basically need to break this up into much smaller chunks and learn a little bit of material, and then test out your knowledge of that material.
Right.
And then move on to a different topic, and then circle back. Because spaced repetition is going to help get this in your head and help you really memorize it. But just trying to memorize something trying to memorize all the material you need for the bar in a week is unlikely to be very effective, right, unless you have a photographic memory, which you probably don't.
Right. And the spaced repetition is very interesting because it's not just about reviewing it. It's really about like recalling it and making it your own. And I think that one of the things that happens when you're doing a lot of this bar prep is so many of the activities are passive.
Right.
That even if you have seen, people will be like, well, I saw the material. It's like seeing it is not really how it works.
Well, or even something like flashcards. It's like, okay, can you flip the flashcard? Can you recall that? Great. Okay. Yeah. Like, that's kind of step one, like this legal trivia type level of just like, these are the elements of whatever, manslaughter.
Right.
Ding, ding, ding. Okay, great. Right. Like, you do need to know that.
Yes.
However, that is really not sufficient.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about studying, preparing for the bar, let's all just accept bar takers don't like to be wrong or fail, because we all want to be lawyers, and typically lawyers are perfectionists.
Right. And also it seems scary because if you're on week 2 of your bar prep and you're seeing law that you've never seen before in your life, or you're getting questions wrong and you're missing, say you're missing 50% of the multiple choice questions you attempt, that can be demoralizing. Mm-hmm. But you're only a couple of weeks in.
Right. Yeah, you got to roll with it.
You got to kind of stick with the process.
Yeah.
If it is 8 weeks of your 10-week program and you're still getting 50% right, then I have a really serious concern about your ability to pass the bar.
Right.
However, 2 weeks in, that's kind of normal.
Well, and that's where you have to really practice this growth mindset about failure. And I think the bar, because you are doing maybe more than you did in law school, like a ton of practice questions, hopefully, and you're getting feedback on performance in a way that maybe you haven't done in law school, that it can be hard to keep that growth mindset. It can be hard to say, this doesn't mean I'm stupid. This means that I need to work on this. That's really the fixed versus the growth. It's not a label or a state of being. It is a process. It is something I can continue to work on. And I think that the bar on a daily basis is going to give you the opportunity to choose that growth mindset over and over again. But if you want to be able to implement a lot of these techniques, which are going to work the best with your brain, you have to be able to keep yourself moving to that growth mindset.
Yeah, we had a really interesting discussion with Kate McGinnis on a recent podcast where she said, as a coach, one of the things she really likes to say is just add yet. Like, I'm not getting, the percentage I need to get on the MBE yet. Mm-hmm. And I think that just turns everything around. Because you're like, oh, okay. It just hasn't happened yet. Okay, right. I can live with that,
Yeah, and I think we get so caught up in exactly where we were supposed to be. So going back, I won't want to talk about my kids on all of these podcasts, but I read a lot of parenting stuff because that's a big part of my life.
Because you have a growth mindset around parenting.
I do, and I'm like a researcher. I kind of am a copious, like deep dive type of researcher. So I see something, and then I have to go like read 10 more things about it. Mm-hmm. It's a good part of my personality. It's also a wasteful part of my personality. The internet does not help that, let's say. And so I came across this thing that was talking about speech. And it was talking about how many words children are supposed to know at a certain milestone, because they've got all this. Your child at 1 year should have 20 words. Your child at 18 months should have 50 words. And then the speech, I'm on this like online mom groups. Anyway, there's a point to this story. Then a mom who was a speech therapist was like, oh, yeah, maybe they need to have 50 words, to not meet this milestone, but they should have like 120 words. And then as a parent, I'm like trying to count the words like my daughter has, who's 18 months. And I'm like, 1, 2, does it count if she thinks it's a word, but it's like and not like avocado? Like, she's got her own made up words for things. Yeah, avocado. Exactly. But, she's got some kooky words for things. And so then you're like counting it up, and I'm like, I don't know how many words she uses and then you kind of like, should I be tracking this? And then I kind of have this moment where I'm like, whoa there, crazy lady. Roll it back. And I think that we can get so caught up in kind of these statistics, right? In bar preps, the same thing. I'm getting 25% of these questions right. I'm getting 50% of these questions right. What's my score on the essay? I'm getting a 50. If I'm getting 50, why aren't I getting a 60? I'm getting a 3, and you can get caught up in like all of these numbers and these kind of like ranking yourself. And that is not any growth mindset. That is not any growth mindset. Like it's like that is, you are totally mistaking like the actual path to learning and the actual path to like growth, right? The question, I think the more important question is not how many words does my daughter have? I think the more important question is she learning new words every day?
Right. And I've met your daughter a number of times. I think she's fine.
Oh, I think she's fine. But you can see how quickly you can go down the rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we can do this with the MBE too.
We were all freaking out because my nephew, who's almost a year, like didn't have any teeth until a month ago. And it was like, well, why doesn't he have teeth? And it's like, there's a bell curve. Some kids don't get teeth immediately.
I know.
Like, he's fine.
My daughter's bald too. she's pretty bald.
He has a lot of hair.
I know. So like he's like overachiever in the hair department. My daughter's an underachiever in the hair department, but that's okay. I do believe she will. I have very long hair. I think she will have hair someday.
Well, your older son has hair, and he didn't have any for a while. But exactly. Point being, like, they're going to get hair eventually. Right. Like you're going to eventually, if you keep at it, you will eventually get more MBE questions correct.
Right, if you are studying in the right way. And so I think that oftentimes we're just asking the wrong questions when we try and evaluate ourselves. And so
yeah, like the overall number is way less important.
Right.
Like 70%.
Right. And I think
okay.
And the other thing is we instead focus on the numbers instead of the struggle. And, when we, like, AdaptBar is a tool that we use in our programming. And in AdaptBar, like, they've built a back end to constantly give you questions that you're going to get wrong, probably because they're the ones you're struggling with. So if you are just only tracking accuracy, you might find that your accuracy is starting to dip.
Oh, yeah. We actually, one of our tutors who's studying for a different bar exam just posted something on our internal Slack group about this, where she basically said, I just realized there was a setting on AdaptBar, and then when I changed the setting, my scores went up. So, they're giving me a different type of question. So if your students are freaking out about their scores not being so great, maybe they can boost their confidence by just changing this one setting.
Right. Or they can also appreciate to keep doing those hard questions because they're probably also going to be making more progress.
Yeah. So I think, you've got to be sort of realistic about what's actually going on here.
Right. I think that's true. And really not get caught up. We have had students. So it might be shocking to hear that not always are all of our tutors in agreement about the best way to do everything. And so we will sometimes have internal discussions about scoring practice exams. This is kind of one of my things. Mm-hmm. I do not like to give students scores on their practice exams. I think it is a distraction. I think the feedback is more important. Every now and then we will have a student who proves me right. and causes us to have this dialogue yet again with all of the tutors, because I think there is this idea that like, well, the scores are what's important. And of course, I'm like, no, it is the process. It is about writing the best possible answer that is important. And then there will be a student who literally cannot look past the score.
Right. And this would be like early on in the process typically too.
Right.
And of course, it would be pretty common for the score that you're getting not to be that amazing because you've just started studying.
Right. But you get so caught up on the score that you don't get caught up on the mistake. And then you don't even, there's no focus on the mistakes. And I would much rather spend energy talking about the mistakes and the solutions and less about the score. So, again, I think that being conscious of these easy pitfalls about how you learn can make it, make you more aware and encourage you to do the heavy lifting, which is going to be testing yourself and making mistakes and learning from them instead of doing affirmation work. I mean, basically like doing easy stuff that is just like making you feel better as a person.
Well, and I think, developing some curiosity about like why maybe your score is not where you want it to be or why you're missing so many of these questions and getting frustrated. If you can turn it into a curiosity of like, okay, I acknowledge that like this is stressful and frustrating and I'm not doing as well as I would like. How can I start to turn this around? Like, what are some very baby steps I can take? And for me, I always go back now because it's winter and I'm doing live ski lessons. Like, okay, like my form is clearly falling apart. Why is that? And it turns out there are these tiny little things you can correct in the moment of like, oh, I need to move my hand forward 6 inches. And you do that and suddenly everything gets a lot easier. So, on the bar, I think it's a lot about like, okay, maybe my MBE scores are dropping and I'm using Adapt-A-Bar. First off, is there a reason that I'm just getting the harder questions? Okay, I can live with that. Or maybe there really is, maybe you are really in the dip. Seth Godin talks about the dip. He's like, that's the part where like things get crappy. And you kind of have to push through that. And that's a normal part of any process like this. But, is it that you're tired? Are you burned out? Do you need to take more breaks? Do you need more coffee? Did you not eat lunch? There are all these things that can be causing your scores to be dipping.
Right.
Or is it literally just you don't know the law? You need to study this area of the law. There's no harm in that. It's like these are all things to get curious about. Why are these things happening to you?
Yeah. The other thing that I think has been interesting over the years as we have hired people is I have seen that identifying mistakes and learning why those mistakes are being made and correcting them are two different skill sets, it turns out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes people are really good at telling you all the things you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's a great starting point. What do I need to do right?
Right. I mean, one of the things that we do is we have a lot of people apply to work for us who have been bar graders. And we like to hire bar graders. Hey, if you're a bar grader listening to this, go ahead, send us an application.
Yeah, we love you.
We love you. But oftentimes I will get these applications and part of our application process is actually doing some feedback. And I have found that people who have spent 10 years or more sometimes grading the bar literally cannot tell somebody how to fix what they've done wrong.
Right. It's like, oh, that's wrong. It's like, okay, great. Well, how should we correct that? What advice can you provide so that the next time this person writes this essay or if they rewrite this essay, they're not making that same mistake?
And I've also found that sometimes those bar graders who sometimes will even grade exams on the same subject matter over and over and over again are not experts in that subject matter because they don't actually practice applying those rules. They can just tell you if the rule is right or wrong. And so they also have a hard time sometimes teaching somebody how to apply that rule because they don't actually have that understanding of it. Now, that does not mean that they're not good at grading consistently on the bar exam. That is a separate skill set. But I think that it's another example of why this idea of having to go through your mistakes and figure out how to remedy them really shifts your understanding of the material in a way that just, I just always think of like the red pen, back when we were in school,
right.
of just like, you get the exam and it's just like, check, crossed off things. You missed 7 and then you just put it in the drawer. I mean, this is about
7. Okay.
Right. This is about wrestling with material and that really changes your engagement with the material.
Well, it's been interesting because we have incorporated a lot more process stuff as we've developed more and more materials.
Yeah.
And so recently we had our tutors actually write sample answers to bar questions. And a lot of them said, wow, that is a different process. I'm actually glad that I did this because I have a better appreciation for what my students are struggling with now.
And it's humbling. I think almost every tutor was humbled by the process of putting themselves under time. We asked them to do it under somewhat time conditions, and trying to execute what the students were doing, because I think that's an exercise that most teachers don't ever put themselves through.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you become the expert, so now you don't have to actually do it. But when you do it, you really, and once you become the expert, that's almost when things become dangerous too. Like for me, I was taught to swim before I could walk. And then years later, when I was a lifeguard, they asked me to teach swimming lessons. And I was a terrible swim instructor because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
I had to really break it down into like, oh, I guess I'm blowing bubbles when I lift my mouth out. I had no idea. I mean, I didn't know.
Yep.
So I think breaking it down and really thinking like, why am I getting water in my mouth? Oh, because they don't know to blow bubbles.
Right. No, it's so true. And so when we try and break down our curriculum, both in our Practice of the Week program, which we call POW, which is on the MBE, our Writing of the Week program, which is on the essays and the performance test, we are really trying to kind of parse through and say, okay, yeah, here's your law, but let's talk about where the struggles are. Is it about, how to outline? Are you making mistakes with outlining? Go back and do it again. We're really trying to kind of help you identify where these mistakes are being made so you can go rework them. Because I really believe that feedback and rewriting is just the missing piece. Nobody likes to do it. Nobody likes to get feedback. Nobody likes to rewrite. Nobody likes that. This is why nobody, wants to go to the dentist because they don't want to get lectured about how they haven't been flossing.
I love going to the dentist.
I know you love the dentist.
Because I always floss.
Because you are a flosser. I know. I've got a water pick. I'm much better than I used to.
I even have my own dental tool that I just scrape everything off with, so they think I've been flossing. Little secret right there.
But I think a lot of people have fears of this stuff. They don't want negative feedback, right? And so there's something about making it okay for you to get this negative feedback so you can learn from it. You can do that for yourself, or you can, engage people or curriculum that will help you do that for you.
Yeah, one of the things I like about the POW program is that we have a video and we explain to you a question, we walk through on a specific piece of law. But one of my favorite pieces is actually that then we give you a sample question on the same topic that you do immediately afterwards. And the idea being, hopefully you learn something and you get it right. But if you didn't, it's a really good point to be like, maybe I should go watch that other video again, or maybe I should think about this a little more deeply because obviously I missed the point here.
Yeah.
And I want you to have that immediate feedback.
And, I think with the writing portion, although we won't torture you with doing multiple essays one right after the other, but I do think that it is interesting to write out an answer and then compare it. We're in the process and have developed sample answers for a lot of our curriculum to compare it to that sample answer. And then you need to go back to your work and say, why didn't I do this like this sample answer? Should I do it again? Try it again, rewrite sections of it. And I hear over and over again when I challenge students to do more rewriting that they do not have time to do this sort of studying. But this is where the magic happens. Put down the video lecture, move the outline to the side. Wrestling with this material is the way that you move it into your brain so you can actually recall it on exam day.
Yeah, and I think that rewrite is such a critical step in the process because that is really, assuming that you actually did struggle the first time to get it correct, that's when your brain is tried to pull out the information and now you can put something else back in a different way that's actually going to help you in the future.
Yeah. The other thing that we do more and more with our tutoring students are these quizzes that we already talked about earlier in the podcast. So even if you're studying by yourself, you're using a commercial bar review, come up with some quizzes. I bet if you wrote a quiz and then took it, you wouldn't forget that information.
Yeah, or even, if you're studying off of an outline, just cover up part of the outline and see if you can write down whatever is in it. If not, you probably don't really know it.
Yeah. All right. So there are lots of stuff that's come out of this podcast that you can try. We've talked about tracking confidence levels with your MBE questions, giving yourself feedback, rewriting questions, quizzing yourself, getting, feedback from external sources, whether it be your school, whether it be a tutor like our team, and then doing rewrites and really doing the heavy lifting and keeping a growth mindset, really sitting and trying to check yourself when you get too negative, because this is not easy, but you got to keep learning new things. Be like a little kid. Just fall down, go boom, get up.
Yeah, it's hard to keep that level of sort of lightness and curiosity. And people are really hesitant to test themselves because they don't want to find out that they're going to be wrong. I can't do practice questions. I don't know the law well enough. It's well, no, that's how you learn the law.
Right.
There's good neuroscience. Read the article. But, you know, I think recognizing the kind of emotional stuff around this and the shame component and all these things and still doing it anyway, that's really the key to passing this test.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about the courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs we offer to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at Lee at barexamtoolbox.com or Alison at barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.